Hello, students, and welcome to part 2 of our lecture on World War II, which in your textbooks is chapter 15. We're going to start out talking about the Tuskegee Airmen. It was an all-black fighter squadron, and if you look in your books on page 471, you'll see a picture of them and something about them. I would like for you to please press pause on this video and look at that picture and read about them. They escorted and protected bombers. In other words, the bomber would fly, which was carrying a heavy payload, and these would be smaller planes that would fly around the bomber and protect them from enemy fire. They had a 100% success rate, which is astounding. In other words, they did not lose a single plane during their time. Here is a picture of the Tuskegee Airmen. So the results of the 1942 bombing campaign is, number one, it relieved pressure from the Soviets in the east. The Soviet Union was fighting from the east toward the west, whereas we were fighting from the west toward the east. This bombing campaign greatly helped the Soviets fight in the east because it took resources and manpower and defenses from the Axis powers, made it easier on the Soviets to attack from the east. It also paved the way for an all-out Allied offensive into the heart of Hitler Europe. So let's turn our sights now to the Pacific. Throughout 1942, the Japanese had attacked many islands in the Pacific and basically owned the bulk of the Pacific. They owned many islands there. They controlled many of the waters there. So the Battle of Midway was the turning point of this. If you remember, we talked about in the last video that the Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point of the war in Europe. In other words, Hitler never had a legitimate chance of winning after that. The turning point in the Pacific was the Battle of Midway. Basically, at the Battle of Midway, this is where the tide started to turn. Instead of Japan taking one island after the other and continuing until they controlled all of the Pacific, we stopped them at the island of Midway. Chester Nimitz was commanding our U.S. naval forces there and put up a very, very brave fight against the Empire of Japan. One thing he did was that he had his men intercept Japanese codes, and it helped them to prepare for the attack. This stopped their advance, and from that point on, the Japanese did not gain territory, but they lost territory because we did something that, and there's a picture of Chester Nimitz. We conducted a strategy called the island hopping campaign, where we would hop from island to island and take those islands back from Japan. So what was going on within the United States during this time? Well, World War II changed America at home as well. It changed society. It changed the things that happened here. Number one, just like we learned about in World War I, many women joined the workforce because the men had to go fight in the armed forces. Kind of the mascot for these women that joined the workforce was Rosie the Riveter. This was a nickname given to a working woman during World War II. And you may recognize this picture. This is a famous picture, and this woman was nicknamed Rosie the Riveter. Number two, blacks, which were entering the workforce in large numbers as well, demanded fair employment. There was a man named A. Philip Randolph who said that we should have what's called a double V campaign. Not only victory of Hitler in Europe, but victory against racism at home. So he said we should be fighting for both of these victories at the same time. He was a man that fought for black rights during World War II, and here's a picture of A. Philip Randolph. That brings us to Executive Order 8802. This ensured fair hiring practices in government jobs. Basically, it gave blacks a better chance at getting a government job during the war. It also ended discrimination in these jobs. And a good way for you to remember this is Executive Order 8802. The eights look vaguely like two people. So you can imagine people being together. In other words, blacks and whites being together, working together. That's what Executive Order 8802 accomplished. We also had the Bracero program, which is a program to bring Mexicans into the U.S. to help work on the farms. Just as the factories, the farms also lost workers because those people went to fight in World War II, and this caused a labor shortage. The other executive order we need to discuss is Executive Order 9066. This created Japanese internment camps. These were basically temporary prison camps for Japanese Americans to live in. The reason for this is, of course, the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, and our government feared that there might be underground sleeper cells or spies from Japan within the United States. So to safeguard against this, they rounded up virtually all the Japanese, especially on the West Coast, and made them live in these internment camps throughout World War II because, again, we feared that they may be enemies fighting for Japan. And that ends section 2 of this lecture. Thank you for watching.